The cold wind cut across the barren plains like sharp knives. Snow and ice stretched as far as the eye could see. She crouched behind a jagged rock, her body trembling not only from the cold, but from exhaustion. Her armor was broken, ripped apart in the last battle, leaving her exposed and weak. She had been abandoned by those she had trusted most. Her comrades, her friends, even her own people. They had left her alone, and the pain of their betrayal sank deep into her bones. She hugged her knees to her chest, shivering. Her mind wandered, back to the life she had known before this moment. Back home she had friends who laughed with her, mentors who guided her, and a family who believed in her. But here, stranded and defenseless, she felt the weight of loneliness pressing down. Every breath was a struggle, every heartbeat a reminder that she was truly alone. The world seemed silent, save for the whisper of the wind through the jagged rocks. She felt as though no one would ever find her, that her life might end here, forgotten in the snow. But then she heard it, a soft crunch of footsteps, careful and deliberate, approaching through the icy field. She turned, her eyes narrowing. Another predator, another threat. Her claws flexed instinctively, ready to defend herself, though she knew her strength was weak. Then she saw him. A human, small in stature compared to her species, but moving with confidence and purpose. His face was calm, almost gentle, even in the harsh landscape. He knelt a few feet away and looked at her with no hint of fear or judgment. Instead, his eyes reflected something she hadn't felt in a long time. Understanding. She flinched when he spoke. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." His voice was warm like sunlight cutting through the cold, and it carried a sincerity that made her pause. She had been abandoned, betrayed, and hurt. But he didn't run. He stayed. He waited. For hours he moved carefully around her, checking her wounds without touching too much, giving her space. He looked at her armor, torn and useless, and then at her frozen skin. Without saying a word, he reached down and removed his coat. It was the only thing he had to keep himself warm. He approached her slowly, wrapping it around her shoulders. The warmth seeped into her body like a healing river. She felt it immediately in her bones, but more than that, she felt it in her heart. For the first time since she had been left behind, she felt safe. She wanted to speak, to ask why he cared, why he didn't leave like the others, but the words would not come. Instead, she simply leaned into the coat, letting its protection remind her that someone still believed in helping others. Over the next hours, he stayed with her. He offered her water from his small canteen, told her stories of distant lands, of people who helped each other even when the world seemed cruel. She listened quietly, afraid to trust, afraid that hope was dangerous. Yet each story, each gesture slowly chipped away at the wall she had built around herself. Humanity, she realized, had a strange strength, not in weapons, not in size, but in compassion and courage. She started to follow him as he led her across the frozen field. At first, her steps were hesitant, unsure of her body, unsure of him. But slowly she began to trust. When he paused to check the path or scan for danger, she watched and learned. When he offered her warmth, she accepted it without shame. The coat was small for two, but it didn't matter. Its warmth carried more than heat. It carried hope. As night fell, the wind grew harsher. She wrapped herself tighter in the coat, and the human held her close, whispering words she could barely understand but somehow felt in her chest. She thought of her friends who had left her behind. She thought of her own pride, once so strong, now humbled. But she also thought of the human who had not abandoned her, who had chosen to care when caring was not easy. Her mind wandered to what she wanted most. She wanted to reconnect, not just with him, but with herself, with hope, with life. She didn't know how she would do it. She didn't know if she could survive the journey ahead. But she felt something inside her stirring, a small ember that refused to die. She wanted to fight, not for revenge, but for trust, for connection, for the chance to know kindness again. When the first light of dawn touched the frozen plains, she opened her eyes and saw him watching her. He smiled gently, and she returned it, hesitant but real. She realized then that it wasn't just the coat that had protected her. It was his choice to act with compassion, to show her that even when others abandoned her, she was not truly alone. The snow sparkled around them, and she stood taller than she had in days. Her broken armor reflected the sunlight, and for the first time it didn't matter. She felt whole in a way that had nothing to do with her body or strength. She felt human, like the human beside her, who had given everything he had without expecting anything in return. And so she walked forward, wrapped in his only coat, no longer just cold and broken but alive, guided by a warmth that went far beyond the snow and ice. For the first time since she had been abandoned, she felt hope. The human walked slowly across the frozen plains, his steps sure and steady. She followed, wrapped tightly in his coat, feeling warmth that went far beyond her frozen skin. Every time the wind blew, she shivered, but the coat kept her safe. She thought about the world she had lost, her friends, her people, her home. They had left her behind, and she did not know if she could ever feel close to anyone again. But the human beside her did not rush her. He moved with patience, always watching for danger, always making sure she could keep up. When her foot slipped on icy rocks, he reached out a steady hand. It was such a simple gesture, but it made her heart feel lighter. She wanted to ask him why he cared so much, why he did not leave her like everyone else had, but she could not find the words. Instead, she listened as he spoke quietly, telling her about humans, about their courage and kindness. His words were slow, careful, but full of warmth. He told her about distant places, about forests and oceans, about people who helped each other even when life was hard. She listened, and for the first time in many days, her mind was not full of anger or sadness. Instead, it filled with curiosity and hope. As they walked, she began to notice small things: the way he moved with care, the way he shared his food, the way he made space for her even when he was cold himself. She realized that humanity had a kind of strength she had never understood. It was not in armor or weapons, not in power or pride, but in the choice to protect someone weaker. Even when it was hard, her own body was still weak. She stumbled sometimes, her legs shaking from the cold and exhaustion. But he never grew impatient. When she fell, he helped her up. When she shivered, he wrapped the coat tighter around her. She wanted to tell him she appreciated it, but the words felt too small for the feelings inside her. Still, she stayed close, learning to trust again, learning to believe in kindness. They made camp under a rocky overhang as night fell. The wind howled around them, and snowflakes swirled in the darkness. He started a small fire, careful not to waste energy, and offered her some water. She drank slowly, feeling life return to her body. He shared a piece of bread, and she hesitated before taking it, ashamed to accept kindness so freely. But hunger reminded her she needed to trust, and so she did. As she warmed herself by the fire, she thought about the distance she felt from her people. They had moved on without her, and now they seemed so far away, not just in space but in her heart. She missed them, and the sadness pressed on her chest. But the human beside her reminded her that distance could be bridged by action, by care, by the courage to reach out. Even when she did not know how to reconnect with her past, she could feel connection through this human, through the warmth he gave her without asking for anything in return. The night was long, but she slept more peacefully than she had in weeks. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope. She imagined a future where she could feel safe, where she could trust again, where she could find a place to belong. She knew it would not be easy. Her wounds were deep, her heart still fragile. But she felt a spark inside her, a small ember that refused to die. The next morning, the human was already awake, checking the path ahead. He offered her a small smile, and she returned it, feeling a connection she had almost forgotten existed. They continued walking together, through icy rivers and frozen forests, over hills that glinted in the pale sunlight. With each step, she felt stronger, more alive. Her sadness did not disappear, but it became bearable, softened by the presence of someone who chose to care for her. She started to talk a little more, telling him her name, asking his, sharing small stories about her life before she was abandoned. The human listened carefully, never interrupting, never judging. She realized that listening itself was an act of kindness, and she felt her trust growing stronger. She wanted to tell him everything, to unburden her heart, but she also knew it would take time. Trust, she understood now, was built slowly, step by step, not given all at once. By midday, they reached a small clearing with a frozen stream. She looked at her reflection in the icy water and barely recognized herself. Her eyes were still filled with pain, but they also held determination. She thought about her people, about those who had left her behind. She still felt distant from them, but now she knew that distance could be crossed, not through anger or despair, but through courage, compassion, and hope. She wanted to reconnect, not just with her past, but with life itself. She wanted to learn to trust again, to help others as she had been helped. She realized that the human beside her had shown her the way. He had no obligation, no duty, no reason to care for her, but he did. And that was the true power of humanity. The choice to give when no one else would, to protect when no one else could, to hope when hope seemed lost. As the day ended and night approached again, she wrapped herself tightly in the coat, feeling its warmth seep into her bones. She looked at the human and felt gratitude, a deep and honest feeling she could barely name. She thought about the future, about the journey ahead, about reconnecting with her people, her friends, her world. She did not know how it would happen, or if it would happen at all, but she felt hope. A real, tangible hope that life could be better, that she could heal, that she could rise again. And so, as the stars emerged in the frozen sky, she leaned into the coat and whispered softly to herself. She was not broken, not alone, not lost. She had warmth. She had care. She had hope. And as she closed her eyes, she knew that no matter the distance, she could move forward, step by step, heart by heart, guided by the courage of a human who had wrapped her in his only coat. The morning sun touched the frozen plains with a pale glow, melting the edges of the snow just enough to reveal hidden paths. She awoke wrapped in the human's coat, feeling its warmth seep into her limbs. Her muscles ached from the long journey, but the ache was bearable now. The human was already awake, preparing a small fire for breakfast. She watched him silently, marveling at his calm and steady ways. Even in a harsh world, he never hurried. He always moved with care, always noticed her needs before she even asked. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but words felt clumsy in her throat. Instead, she slowly sat up, feeling the lingering warmth of the coat. She remembered the pain of her past, the betrayal, the distance from those she cared about, the loneliness that had settled in her chest. She thought of her friends, her family, her people who had moved on without her. They were far away now, and she didn't know if she could ever reconnect with them. But she realized that this human had taught her something new, that trust could grow again, even when it seemed impossible. After breakfast, they continued their journey across the snowy landscape. The terrain was treacherous, jagged rocks hidden beneath the snow, icy rivers that could sweep a person away. At times, fear crept into her chest. She was still weak, still fragile, and every step was a test of courage. But she followed him closely, learning from the way he moved, steady, careful, confident. She began to understand that safety wasn't just about strength. It was about attention, patience, and the choice to act with care. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. As they paused at a ridge, she looked at him, unsure what to say. His words were simple, but they carried a weight she had not expected. She realized she had doubted herself too often, had let the distance from her people convince her she was powerless. But here, with him, she saw a glimpse of what she could be. Someone capable of trust, of courage, of hope. She wanted to reconnect with her people. She wanted to bridge the distance, to reach out despite the fear and pain. But she didn't know how. Every memory of betrayal made her heart tighten. Every thought of rejection made her pause. Yet watching the human who had chosen to stay with her, who had wrapped her in his coat without hesitation, she began to understand that reconnection wasn't about rushing forward blindly. It was about small steps, careful gestures, and consistent care. As they descended into a narrow valley, they came across the remains of a small shelter, abandoned and empty. She knelt to examine it, noticing footprints leading away. Memories of her past returned sharply. Friends she had trusted, people who had promised to protect her, now gone or distant. She felt the old pang of sadness, the feeling of being left behind. But she looked at the human beside her, offering steady reassurance, and felt a warmth she could not name. She realized that hope could exist even in the coldest, loneliest places. The human helped her gather firewood, teaching her small skills she had long forgotten. She listened, asked questions, and tried to imitate his actions. She stumbled, dropped wood, slipped on ice, but he never showed frustration. Instead, he offered a quiet smile, a hand to steady her, a gentle word to encourage her. Slowly, she began to feel useful again, capable again. She realized that the distance she felt from her past did not mean she was powerless. It meant she could build new connections, step by step, with patience and care. As night fell, they set up camp beneath a cluster of frozen trees. She wrapped herself in the coat once more, feeling its warmth against her skin. The human built a small fire and offered her food. She ate slowly, savoring not only the taste but the care behind it. She thought about the friends she had lost, the people who had moved away, and felt a wave of sadness. But she also thought about the human who had not abandoned her, and a new feeling began to grow. Hope. Do you think I could see them again? She asked quietly, almost afraid to speak. The human looked at her, his eyes steady and kind. If you want to, you will, he said simply. Sometimes it takes courage to reach out. Sometimes it takes time. But you can try. She nodded slowly, feeling a spark of determination. She realized that reconnection, like trust, could not be forced. It had to be earned, nurtured, and approached with patience. She could not control how her people would respond, but she could control her own heart. She could open it, step by step, like the human had opened his to her. They spent the night sharing stories by the fire. She told him fragments of her life, hesitating at first, but gradually revealing more. He listened, never interrupting, never judging. She began to understand that listening itself was a gift, and in giving it, he had shown her what humanity could be. Selfless, patient, kind, and strong in ways beyond mere physical power. By the time dawn broke, she felt a quiet strength growing inside her. She was still hurt, still carrying the weight of distance from her past, but she also carried warmth, courage, and hope. She looked at the human beside her and realized that the coat he had given her was more than fabric. It was a symbol of connection, protection, and trust. It reminded her that even when others abandoned her, she could still find care, guidance, and friendship. As they continued walking, she started to notice small changes in herself. She walked taller, moved with more confidence, and spoke more freely. The sadness from the distance she felt from her people did not disappear entirely, but it became something she could carry without breaking. She realized that reconnection was possible, not only with others but also with herself. That night, wrapped in the human's coat, she looked at the stars in the frozen sky and whispered softly, she would find a way to reach out, to reconnect, to rebuild what had been lost. And even if the journey was long and uncertain, she knew she would not be alone. She had warmth, protection, and hope. She had the courage to try again. The frozen plains stretched endlessly before her, pale under the weak sunlight. Wrapped in the human's coat, she moved with growing confidence, her body stronger than it had been just days before. Each step reminded her that she was no longer helpless. She had warmth, she had guidance, and she had hope. Yet deep in her heart a quiet sadness lingered. The distance from the people she cared about weighed heavily on her. She missed them, and she did not know how to reach them again. The human walked beside her, noticing the shadow on her face. "Thinking about them?" he asked softly. She nodded, unable to speak at first. The thought of reconnecting with her friends, with her people, seemed almost impossible. They had moved on, leaving her behind. She feared that trying to reach out would only bring more pain. But the human's presence reminded her that fear could be faced with patience and courage. "Sometimes," he said, "the first step is just deciding to try. You don't have to know everything at once, you just start." She looked at him, absorbing his words. He had shown her what trust and compassion looked like. He had stayed with her when others abandoned her. Now, his words offered a guide for the next challenge, reconnecting with those she had lost. She realized that it was not just about facing them. It was about facing her own doubts, her own fear, and choosing hope over despair. As they walked, she began to practice speaking aloud, rehearsing the words she would use if she could reach out to her friends. "I was hurt. I was left. But I want to reconnect," she whispered softly, testing the sounds. The human smiled, nodding. "Good. Step by step," he said. "Courage grows with action, not thought alone." They reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley. Below, she could see distant settlements, structures of her people far away. Her heart ached at the sight. Memories flooded back, laughter, arguments, promises made and broken. She longed to be part of that world again. Yet fear held her back. What if they didn't welcome her? What if the distance she felt was permanent? The human crouched beside her. "You will never know if you don't try. Even a small gesture matters. Even a simple word can start to bridge the distance." His voice was calm but filled with belief. She realized then that reconnection was not about rushing or demanding. It was about courage and the willingness to reach out, no matter the uncertainty. That evening, they camped near a frozen stream. She sat by the fire, thinking about the journey ahead. The human shared his food and water, and she took it gratefully. She wanted to tell him how much he had changed her perspective, how he had shown her that hope was real and trust could grow again. But words felt too small for the emotions inside her. Instead, she watched the fire, letting its warmth fill the spaces that sadness had carved in her heart. As the night deepened, she realized she had begun to let go of some of the fear she had carried. She thought about her friends, not with bitterness, but with a quiet longing. She wanted to reconnect, not for revenge or to prove herself, but simply to rebuild what had been lost. She understood now that reconnection required patience, courage, and humility. It required trust in herself, trust in others, and above all, hope. The human sat silently beside her, watching the stars. "You've come far," he said quietly. She looked at him, surprised. I'm not sure," she admitted. "I still feel distant. I still don't know how to reach them." "You've already taken the first step," he said. "You are learning to trust, to care, and to hope again. That is more than many can do. The next steps will come naturally." She thought about his words. Trust had been shattered within her, yet here she was, practicing courage, learning to speak, learning to act despite her fear. She felt a new strength inside her, a quiet determination that she could face the distance, face her sadness, and try to reconnect. It would take time, it would take patience, but she had hope, and hope, she realized, was the first real step toward bridging any distance. Over the next days, the journey continued. She practiced small gestures of confidence, speaking clearly, taking the lead when possible, helping gather supplies, learning to anticipate the environment. With each action, she felt a growing sense of agency. The sadness of separation was still there, but it no longer held her captive. She realized that reconnecting with others started with reconnecting with herself, her courage, her trust, and her belief that connection was possible. The human's care never wavered. Each time she faltered, he encouraged her. Each time she doubted, he reminded her that courage was built through action. She learned to lean on him not as a crutch but as a guide, using his example to find strength within herself. In his quiet patience, she saw the essence of humanity, the ability to give without expecting, to protect without requirement, to offer hope when despair seemed overwhelming. One morning, they stopped near the edge of a forest. She looked at the trees, imagining a path that could lead her back to her people. The thought terrified her, but it also excited her. She wanted to try, to send a message, to reach out even if the response was uncertain. She realized that courage and hope could coexist with fear. Fear did not mean failure, it simply meant that the step was worth taking. The human knelt beside her and handed her a small piece of cloth from his coat. "Take this," he said. "A reminder that you are not alone even when the path feels distant." She held it in her hands, feeling the warmth and the meaning behind it. She understood now that reconnection was not just about bridging the distance to others, but about carrying the courage and hope within her. As night fell, she wrapped herself in the coat once more, looking at the stars and feeling a sense of determination growing inside her. She still felt distant from her friends and her people, but she also felt a quiet belief that she could reach them again. One step at a time, one gesture at a time. She had warmth, she had care, and she had hope. She had learned that even when others moved away, even when distance seemed insurmountable, connection was always possible if she had the courage to try. They had left her naked and broken. The human had wrapped her in his only coat, and now she was learning to carry courage, hope, and the strength to reconnect with the world she thought she had lost. The cold wind had softened slightly as they reached the edge of a vast forest. Snow still covered the ground, but patches of brown earth peeked through. She walked beside the human, her steps surer now, her mind clearer. She had grown stronger in the days since she had been found, stronger in body and in spirit. Yet, the sadness inside her still lingered. The distance from those she cared about weighed heavily on her heart. She wanted to reconnect with them, to rebuild what had been lost, but she didn't know how to begin. The human noticed her silence. "You're thinking about them again?" he said gently. She nodded, grateful that he understood without asking too many questions. His patience had taught her that trust and hope were built slowly, and now she realized that the same patience was needed to reconnect with others. "I don't know if they even want to hear from me," she admitted, her voice small. "They've moved on. Maybe they don't care anymore." The human shook his head slowly. "You won't know unless you try. Even a small gesture matters. Courage is not about being fearless. It's about acting even when you are afraid." She thought about his words. Courage, hope, connection. All of them seemed fragile in her heart, but she also felt them growing stronger. She realized that if she wanted to reach out, she had to start with one small step, no matter how uncertain it felt. That afternoon, they made camp near a frozen stream. She watched the sunlight glitter on the ice and thought about the people she had left behind. Memories of laughter and friendship, of shared victories and quiet talks, filled her mind. She longed to hear their voices again, to see them smile, to tell them she still cared. The thought both comforted and frightened her. What if they didn't remember her the same way? What if the distance had grown too wide? The human knelt beside her, noticing the doubt in her eyes. "Start small," he said. "A word, a gesture, a message. You don't have to fix everything at once. Just let them know you are here." She nodded slowly. He was right. Even if the response was uncertain, even if it brought pain, taking that first step was important. She realized that the distance she felt was not permanent. Connection could be rebuilt, carefully, patiently, with courage and hope as guides. She took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill her lungs. Then she began to speak aloud, practicing the words she would use if she could reach her people. "I was left behind. I felt alone. I want to reconnect." The words felt heavy at first, but the act of speaking them gave her strength. The human watched silently, his presence steady, giving her courage to continue. Night fell, and the stars shone bright above them. Wrapped in the human's coat, she felt the warmth of his care in every fiber. She realized that the coat had come to symbolize more than protection from cold. It symbolized trust, selflessness, and the courage to reach out. If she could feel safe and valued with him, maybe she could find the same trust in her people. Maybe she could let them see her again, even if she had been hurt in the past. The next morning, she decided to take her first step. She found a piece of smooth bark and a small charcoal stick. With trembling hands, she wrote a simple message, practicing the words she had spoken aloud the night before. I am here. I have not forgotten. I hope we can speak again. She looked at the human, unsure if it was enough, but he smiled at her and nodded. It is more than enough, he said. The first step is always the hardest. Courage lies in action, not thought. Together they traveled toward the nearest settlement of her people. The journey was difficult. Snowdrifts slowed their steps, icy rivers blocked paths, and the wind tried to push them back. But each challenge reminded her that courage was not about ease, it was about persistence. She pressed forward, her heart focused on reconnecting, her mind remembering the warmth of the human's care. During the journey, she began to notice small changes within herself. She spoke more freely, laughed quietly at small jokes, and even started to anticipate challenges before they happened. The human's patience and guidance had given her confidence. She realized that reconnecting with her people was not only about facing them, it was also about believing in her own strength, her own ability to reach out despite fear. One evening, as they rested by a small frozen pond, she saw her reflection in the ice. For the first time in a long time, she recognized herself. Her eyes were no longer clouded entirely by sadness. They carried determination, courage, and hope. She understood that even though the distance felt enormous, even though time had passed, she had the power to bridge the gap, one step, one word, one gesture at a time. The human offered her some water and smiled. "You're ready," he said softly. She hesitated at first, then nodded. She felt a quiet fire growing in her chest. She would try. She would reach out. She would reconnect, even if it was difficult or uncertain. Finally, as the stars rose above the frozen landscape, she carefully folded the small message and placed it in a safe pouch. It was ready to be delivered, ready to carry her hope to those she had missed. She wrapped herself in the human's coat, feeling its warmth once more, and whispered softly to herself. She would not let distance define her. She would not let fear stop her. She had courage. She had hope. And she would take the first step toward those she loved. They had left her naked and broken. The human had wrapped her in his only coat, and now she had found the courage to take her first step toward reconnecting with the people she cared about. The day was cold, and the wind howled through the narrow mountain pass. Snow swirled around, them like tiny white spirits, and the frozen ground made every step treacherous. She walked carefully, keeping close to the human beside her. The coat he had given her wrapped tightly around her shoulders, carrying warmth and comfort. But more than that, it carried courage. She had taken her first step toward reconnecting with those she cared about, but the journey was far from over. The thought of what lay ahead made her heart beat faster. The settlement of her people was still distant, and she did not know how they would respond. Would they remember her? Would they welcome her back? Or would they turn away, leaving her feeling abandoned once more? Fear threatened to slow her steps, but she pressed forward, thinking of the human who had not abandoned her, who had stayed when others left. His example gave her strength she did not know she possessed. Suddenly, the ground shifted beneath her feet. She stumbled on a hidden patch of ice, nearly falling into a small crevice. The human caught her arm instantly, steadying her with a firm grip. "Careful," he said gently, helping her regain balance. She looked at him, gratitude in her eyes. Even in the harshest conditions, he had never left her side. Even when the world was against them, he showed patience, care, and courage. She realized then that the journey toward reconnection was like this mountain pass. Dangerous, uncertain, and frightening, but possible if she did not give up. Every step mattered. Every choice mattered. She had the power to continue, not because the path was easy, but because she had hope, guidance, and determination. As they walked, her thoughts returned to her people. She remembered their voices, their laughter, the moments they had shared, before distance had grown between them. She missed them deeply. Her heart ached with the desire to reconnect, but she also realized that reaching out required more than longing. It required courage, patience, and action. The human noticed her pause. "Thinking about them again?" he asked. She nodded. "I don't know if they will remember me," she admitted. "I don't know if they even want to hear from me." "Then, you will give them the chance to remember," he said. "You cannot control their response, only your actions. Courage is choosing to act even when the outcome is uncertain." His words echoed in her mind as they continued. She had been afraid for so long, afraid of rejection, afraid of failure, afraid of being abandoned again. But now, with the human beside her, she felt the quiet strength to face that fear. She could not predict how her people would respond, but she could control the steps she took to reach them. As evening approached, they found shelter in a small cave. She wrapped herself tightly in the coat, feeling its warmth seep into her bones. The human started a small fire and offered her water. She drank slowly, savoring not only the refreshment but the care behind it. Each small act reminded her that connection was possible, even when it seemed impossible. She took out the small message she had prepared days ago. The words felt heavy in her hands. "I am here. I have not forgotten. I hope we can speak again." She traced the letters with her fingers, imagining the faces of those she cared about as they read it. Fear lingered in her chest, but determination was stronger now. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. The human watched her quietly. "You are ready," he said softly. "The hardest part is done. Now, you must act." The next morning, they began the final stretch to the settlement. The terrain grew rougher and the cold sharper, but she felt stronger than ever. Each step carried a purpose. Each breath carried hope. She thought about the message in her pouch, about the first small step she had taken, and about the courage that had grown within her since leaving the frozen plains behind. Along the way, she encountered signs of life, tracks in the snow, distant voices, smoke rising from chimneys. Her heart raced with both fear and hope. This was the moment she had been preparing for. She could not turn back now. She had traveled too far, grown too much, and learned too many lessons from the human who had guided her. At the edge of the settlement, she paused. The gates were visible, and beyond them, her people moved about their daily lives. She took a deep breath, feeling the cold bite at her cheeks. She reached for the pouch containing her message, holding it close to her heart. The human stood beside her, silent but supportive, letting her face this moment with her own courage. With trembling hands, she stepped forward, walking toward the gates. Her heart pounded with every step. She felt small, vulnerable, and uncertain. But she also felt something stronger than fear, hope. The warmth of the coat reminded her that she was not alone. The human's presence reminded her that kindness and courage could guide her even through the hardest challenges. She reached the gate and saw familiar faces. Some paused, staring at her with surprise. Some whispered to each other, unsure what to make of her sudden appearance. She took a deep breath and handed the small message to the nearest person. I want to reconnect," she said quietly. "I have not forgotten. I hope you will listen." The person looked at her, reading the message, and nodded slowly. Others gathered, their expressions curious but not hostile. She felt fear rising, but she also felt the quiet fire of courage she had nurtured over the past days. She had taken the first step. Now, the next moments would decide what came next. But, no matter what, she knew she had acted with hope and honesty. The human watched from a short distance, letting her take this moment herself. He had given her warmth, protection, and guidance, but now it was her turn to face the distance she had felt from her people. She understood that the courage she had learned from him was hers alone, and it would carry her further than any coat or protection ever could. As the sun set, casting golden light over the settlement, she felt a sense of quiet triumph. She had faced the hardest part of her journey, the fear of reconnecting. She did not yet know how her people would respond fully, but she had acted. She had spoken her truth. She had carried hope forward step by step, with courage that came from the human who had once wrapped her in his only coat.